Hello, welcome to Washington Talk. I'm Young-Kyo Kim. Amid renewed moves by the international community to step up pressure on North Korea, news came out that a UN report assessed North Korea has probably miniaturized nuclear warheads, suggesting the North Korean regime is tirelessly working to perfect its nuclear technology. Meanwhile, days of heavy rain are drenching the whole Korean peninsula. While both South and North Korea are battling floods and landslides, the North is expected to be hit harder, with the country lacking sufficient infrastructure for disaster. Today we'll discuss these and more. Joining us is Mellisa Hanham. She's the Deputy Director of Open Nuclear Network, a program at opunOs퓨처. She's an expert on weapons of mass destruction, studying North Korea and China's weapons over a decade. Scott Snyder also joins us today. He is a Senior Fellow for Korea Studies and Director of the Program on U.S.-Korea Policy at the Council on Foreign Relations. His book, South Korea at the Crossroads, examines the trajectory of South Korean foreign policy. Thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you, Young-Kyo.
Thank you.
I would like to start with the severe flooding. The Korean peninsula is affected by one of the worst monsoon seasons in history. Mr. Snyder, while South Korea witnessed some casualties, North Korea seems to be more vulnerable to this kind of a natural disaster. Why is that?
Well, North Korea faces a lot of problems. Part of it is North Korea's policy of food self-sufficiency in combination with the topography of the land. And so I think the real concern here is that Hwanghae province is the breadbasket for North Korean rice production. And that seems to be where a lot of the flooding could occur. And then I think the other aspect of danger for North Korea is related to the fact that because of food self-sufficiency objectives, there's a lot of agriculture going on sloping lands, especially private cultivation. And those sloping lands are going to be particularly in danger of risk related to soil erosion under the circumstances.
Ms. Hanham, how would you interpret North Korean leader Kim Jong-un's visit to the flood-hit district? Is he worrying that he might lose internal support when the country has already been struggling with the economic woes?
Yeah, based on the photographs and information that have been released so far, it seems like he's acting largely the way any leader would. He's gone to the area that was most impacted, and they've just demonstrated photos of him looking concerned and assembling a team who can advise him on policies going forward. I also saw several photographs of him, not him, but the team setting up for the storms ahead of time too. So it definitely looks like they're trying to demonstrate to the people that they are preparing and now acting on Kim Jong-un's orders.
Mr. Snyder, this flooding will most likely deal another blow to the country, which is already damaged by sanctions and coronavirus. How will North Korea manage to navigate its way out?
Well, we'll see. I think that it's important that the leadership, maybe in contrast to under Kim Jong-il, Kim Jong-un seems to be very attentive to these issues. But I think that the real indicator from an external perspective of duress in North Korea is when North Korea begins to reach out and accept assistance from the international community because of the strong emphasis on self-sufficiency. And the problem with that is that it activates the prospects for diplomacy, but it does so under conditions where North Korea shows that it is weak and vulnerable. And therefore, it's most likely that North Korea will resort to diplomacy primarily to meet the immediate need, but probably not to engage in constructive give and take on issues that we most care about.
In the meantime, this year's interim report compiled by the UN experts has drawn much attention by bringing up North Korea's possible miniaturization of nuclear warheads. There has been a lot of debate over North Korea's miniaturization capability over the years. Ms. Hanham, what is your assessment on this?
Well, I think that the UN panel of experts has generally done a good job assessing North Korean capabilities, but in this case, it comes long after other assessments, including the US assessment in 2013 that they may have miniaturized a warhead that could fit on an ICBM, and then later in 2017 that they may in fact have 60 warheads already. So there's nothing truly new to draw from the latest reports, but I think it adds further credibility and belief that North Korea is able to deliver atomic warheads a number of different ways.
I agree with Melissa that in a way this is old news, and it shows, I think, that miniaturization is sensitive for the international community as a threshold that North Korea, frankly, has crossed. And it underscores the dangers inherent in North Korea's nuclear development program.
Ms. Hanham, is there something like an optimal level in achieving miniaturization? Some analysts estimate North Korea can create a warhead that weighs 500 to 600 kilograms. How does it compare to the US or Russia's capability to miniaturize nuclear devices?
Sure. So when you think about how heavy a payload a missile can take, there's a trade-off because it depends how far you want to fly the missile with how heavy the object actually is that you want to send. So when we think about estimating North Korea's capabilities, we think about the range and the payload. The more compact a warhead that North Korea can produce, the farther it can go. And for almost half a decade, North Korea has argued that it is able to deliver a compact warhead on an ICBM, and that this warhead is standardized across many different types of missiles. So it seems that the strategy they're promoting is that they can use a similar warhead like the one we saw Kim Jong-un standing next to in 2016 across many of their missile systems, including the shorter range missiles that are well known called the Norong, as well as their new ICBMs, the Hwasong 14 and Hwasong 15, for example. The Hwasong 15 is in fact so large that they could theoretically, though there is no evidence yet, they could deliver multiple warheads on the Hwasong 15. Comparing this to the United States and Russia, it's vastly different. The US and Russia have developed a whole multitude of different types of warheads, where North Korea has likely only developed two. However, the US and Russia are much focused on the types of missions that they would use, the different scenarios they would have to face in wartime, where North Korea is more thinking about the minimum deterrence they have to maintain in order to prevent aggression from the US, for example.
In order to perfect the nuclear weapon, we're often told that one needs to accomplish three things, which is miniaturization, re-entry into the Earth's atmosphere, and then the accuracy, which means the ability to strike a target, right? How far has North Korea come in each of these three aspects?
Yeah. So the difficult thing is that we don't have solid proof on any of these things. And so many people question North Korea's ability. What I generally say in this situation is, although we don't have smoking gun proof that North Korea has miniaturized the warhead, that it can indeed survive re-entry through the atmosphere, or that it's very accurate, that from a policy perspective, we should focus on the fact that they likely can credibly deliver a nuclear warhead. When it comes to countries like the United States and Russia, accuracy is very important. They are indeed trying to strike pinpoint locations in order to prevent a retaliation from the other country. So they're seeking specific military or even civilian locations in order to develop their nuclear strategy. For North Korea, accuracy is likely less important. Really, all they have to do is determine that they can deliver a weapon to the mainland. And regardless of where exactly it hits, it's going to be terrible. And in their calculation, that's enough to deter the United States from aggression. I would also add on that while a lot of analysts question North Korea's ability to miniaturize or even demonstrate reentry, that these two capabilities are really not the most difficult for them to tackle. They've already tackled the warhead design and the missile itself, and there's never ever been a case where a country has developed these capabilities without developing the rest of them. And the more we aggressively criticize North Korea, the more they may indeed feel that they have to prove that they can do it. And the only way they could prove it is by launching a live nuclear weapon on a missile, potentially into the Pacific Ocean. And this by itself is an extremely dangerous act, an act that neighbors would not be able to tell whether this is truly a test or the beginning of a war. So I'm personally not inclined to encourage them to do that.
Mr. Snyder, what is your thought on this?
Well, I think that Mellisa is right that in many respects, North Korea has run up against some limits in terms of what it can do related to testing. And she has also brought up the possibility of North Korea trying to conduct a test that I think would really be a game changer for the international community in terms of policy response, and really is way too risky even for North Korea to pursue. And so in some respects, I think that the ambiguity related to North Korea's actual capabilities is likely to remain, but I agree that it does not negate the seriousness of the likelihood that they have that capability.
North Korea has managed to go around sanctions despite the international efforts to cut off funding for its nuclear and missile programs. The UN report mentioned North Korea's coal export and oil import, as well as the cyber activities. Mr. Snyder, your thoughts on this?
Well, North Korea continues to pursue sanctions evasion efforts, and I think that it's notable that under the circumstances that they're trying to resume directly exports of coal, which is a money maker for North Korea. And it also continues to be notable that their primary customers are in China, and that China really is not living up to their word on sanctions enforcement. I think that it's pretty clear that regardless of whether it is a tacit or active decision in terms of Chinese policy, this is a problem that the Chinese leadership is aware of and that they continue to choose not to respond to.
Meanwhile, the U.S. administration officials continue to stress the importance of sanctions enforcement. This week, U.S. Ambassador to the UN, Kelly Craft, Assistant Secretary of State David Stilwell, and Alex Wong, Deputy Special Representative for North Korea, they all emphasize continuing pressure on North Korea. Ms. Hanham, do you think the U.S. administration is reaffirming its previous position?
I think the U.S. wants to maintain a very strict focus on sanctions. I think that the U.S. activities in other areas and the relationships that it has with China and Russia are a little bit rocky right now, and certainly it doesn't invite a lot of cooperation on sanctions. So I think the U.S. is in lockstep, but its other team members, let's say, on the sanctions issues are not.
Mr. Snyder, can the U.S. really do something about this?
Well, on this particular issue, the critical problem that the U.S. has is while it continues to voice commitment to enforcement, it's doing so against the backdrop of growing tension in U.S.-China relations. And so the ability of the U.S. to convince China to actually strengthen sanctions enforcement is diminishing, and we are seeing the effect of that. And I think that it is a loophole that has opened for North Korea that actually gives North Korea considerably wide range to avoid the worst in terms of what the U.S. would like to achieve on sanctions enforcement.
Well, the question now is whether the new UN report will trigger more pressure from the international community, which can bring about a real change in North Korea's behavior. And that we'll have to find out. Ms. Hanham and Mr. Snyder, thank you both very much. I appreciate your time today.
Thank you.
Thank you.
And that does it for this week's Washington Talk from Voice of America. Please join us again next week for more analysis. Goodbye.